You have been deceived by a romanticized version of sensitivity. The world has told you that your ability to feel deeply makes you a healer, a martyr, a gentle soul who must endure the weight of others. This is a calculated deception designed to keep you in a state of service. Niccolo Machiavelli understood that in the arena of power, any trait that is not controlled is a liability, but any trait that is mastered becomes a weapon. The empath is not a victim of their feelings, they are a scout in the territory of human nature, but a scout without armor is merely a casualty. Machiavelli observed that it is much safer to be feared than loved, and for the hypersensitive man, this fear does not come from the sword, it comes from absolute sight. When you integrate your shadow, you do not become more open. You become operationally dangerous to anyone who relies on deception to survive. You stop being the person who absorbs the tension, and you start being the person who dictates the terms of the engagement. We are moving beyond the myth of the gentle empath. We are entering the era of the sovereign observer. The transformation from a fragmented servant to a Machiavellian master begins now. Before you master the art of the sovereign, you exist in a state of psychological leakage. Your nervous system operates without a border. Scanning for emotional frequencies as a matter of survival necessity, you register the tremors of anxiety, the hidden hostility, and the unspoken grief of every person you encounter. Machiavelli noted that a prince must always be aware of the humors of his people, but you have allowed those humors to flood your own palace. You learned to read micro-expressions and vocal inflections because your early environment was a minefield. Perhaps you had a parent whose mood was the weather of your home, or a family system where words were used as camouflage for a darker reality. You developed a high-resolution detection system, not because you were special, but because you had to predict the strike before it landed. But here is the Machiavellian cost of that survival strategy. While your perception sharpened, your defenses vanished. You fell into the trap of unconscious participation. You lost the ability to distinguish between your internal content and the toxic waste of those around you. You walked into a room and absorbed the collective shadows of everyone present as if they were your own blood. In the absence of a sovereign ego, your receptivity became a form of indiscriminate consumption. You consumed the rage, the grief, and the shame of others because you had no iron gates to protect your inner sanctuary. You convinced yourself that your purpose was to process the pain of the world. You became the therapist at 12, the mediator at 16, and the emotional pack mule at 25. With every role you accepted, you buried your own power under layers of borrowed suffering. You had no limits because you feared that a limit would result in exile. You said yes while your soul screamed no. Machiavelli would call this the height of folly. You are burning your own resources to defend a territory that isn't even yours. The unhealed observer is a living repository for the collective shadow. You carry the denied aggression, the repressed shames, and the unacknowledged manipulations of everyone in your circle. Consider the strategic ruin of this position. When you spend your years absorbing external content, you lose the map of your own heart. You can read everyone in the room, but you are a stranger to yourself. You are a sophisticated psychological instrument pointed outward, with no capacity for internal calibration. This is the pre-integrated state: maximum perception, zero protection, and total self-betrayal disguised as empathy. Machiavelli observed that most men do not change until they are forced by a crisis of betrayal. For the sensitive man, this crisis usually arrives in the form of a predator you tried to save, someone you protected, someone whose pain you metabolized, someone you believed would never exploit your transparency. And then, the mask slips. You discover they have been utilizing your openness as a resource to be mined. They never saw you as a man, they saw you as a function. This is the moment of the great choice. You can continue to override your own accuracy to maintain the illusion of the relationship, or you can trust what your detection system has been telling you for years. Machiavelli knew that he who seeks to deceive will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived. To stop being a victim, you must stop being a conspirator in your own deception. You must confront your own denied aggression, your suppressed coldness, and your capacity for total severance. These are the qualities you've labeled as evil, but in the Machiavellian architecture of the soul, these are the high walls of the fortress. Integration is not a gentle process of affirmations, it is a clinical reclamation of power. It is the moment you stop committing acts of violence against yourself to preserve the comfort of others. Machiavelli documented 3 distinct stages in the transition from a servant to a sovereign observer. Stage 1, the cessation of absorption. You stop being a dumpster for other people's emotional waste. You develop conscious differentiation. You observe the projectio N of rage or guilt. You recognize it as their property, and you refuse to sign for the delivery when someone tries to make you responsible for their emotional state, and you simply watch them without taking it in. Their manipulation collapses. They are left holding a weight they intended for you, and you are watching them struggle with it, unmoved. This is not cruelty, it is the natural consequence of consciousness meeting a parasite. Stage 2, aggressive selectivity. You become the architect of your own access. You apply your differentiated perception to determine who is worthy of entering your internal world. This is not a wall, it is a filter. You reserve your deep presence for those who demonstrate reciprocal integrity. For everyone else, you become a threshold with non-negotiable conditions. You do not explain these conditions. You do not defend them. You simply operate from them. This is where you trade nice for civil. Civility is the clarity of a sovereign. Niceness is the cowardice of a servant. Kindness is allowing someone to face the consequences of their own choices. Stage 3, the predictive monarch. You stop second-guessing your data. Every time you absorb someone's state in the past, you are logging a database of human behavior. You have seen the patterns unfold 1,000 times. You know the lie before it is spoken. You see the move 3 steps ahead. The unintegrated man feels guilty for knowing the truth. The integrated man uses that truth to navigate the world with a cold, surgical precision. You see the game before it starts, and you refuse to play by their rules. By this stage of the evolution, you have become what Machiavelli would describe as a psychological prince. You are no longer a mere casualty of your environment, you are a calibrated instrument of high-resolution predictive intelligence. To understand your new power, you must first reframe the agony of your past. Think about the true nature of what you have been doing all these years during your period of fragmentation. Every time you entered a room and felt the sudden drop in pressure, you were collecting intelligence. Every time you sensed a lie before it was even fully formed in the speaker's mind, you were mapping a betrayal. Every time you registered the hidden tremors of hostility behind a smile, you were not just suffering. You were logging data into a massive, unrefined, and raw database of human deception. You have spent a lifetime studying the behavioral rhythms and micro-manipulations of the common man. The unhealed observer collects this data but feels a deep, crushing guilt for actually using it. Society, in its desire to keep you manageable, taught you that judging others was a moral failure. You were programmed to second-guess your own radar and ignore your instincts. You told yourself you were being cynical when your internal alarms identified a predator. You overrode your internal warning systems because doing so felt like the more compassionate path. But the Machiavellian sovereign understands that morality without self-preservation is nothing more than a slow suicide. The integrated observer trusts their database completely and without apology when every nerve in your body signals deception. You no longer require external validation or physical proof. You do not need a confession, and you do not need a witness, because you already know, and because you know, you act with a cold, clinical, and surgical finality. This is what makes the healed observer operationally dangerous to the status quo. You see the game before the pieces are even set on the board. Someone sits across from you, and within the first 3 interactions, you have already mapped their psychological trajectory. You know they are lying about their history, and you know they are manufacturing a crisis to extract your labor. You know because the micro-expressions do not lie, and the behavioral rhythms of a parasite are consistent across history. This is differentiated perception at full operational capacity. You are processing psychological and emotional information at a resolution that most humans will never develop. You possess a framework built through survival necessity that now functions as a sophisticated threat detection system. But here is the critical element. You possess the power to destroy. But you choose the power of integrity. You understand the mechanics of manipulation better than the narcissists who once controlled you. You know exactly which vulnerabilities to exploit in others, yet you refuse to deploy it for domination. Machiavelli noted that to be truly great, a prince must have the ability to be a beast, but the wisdom to remain a man. You integrate your shadow so that you can see the beast in others, not so you can become a mindless predator yourself. You make a daily, conscious, and ethical choice to use your capabilities for the defense of your kingdom. You see the shortcuts. You recognize the unfair advantages your perception provides, but you reject them, not because you lack the capacity for cruelty, but because you have developed internal authority. When you complete this integration, you create a ripple effect that forces everyone in your proximity to evolve. Family systems built on a foundation of dysfunction cannot survive the presence of a sovereign, not because you are attacking them, but because you have ceased to be the structural support that held their rot together. When you remove the person who always absorbed the tension, the entire system must reorganize or collapse. The moment the sovereign stops absorbing the emotional debris of the group, the old world begins to crumble. Machiavelli observed that he who is the cause of another becoming powerful is the ruin of himself. For years, you were the cause of the power held by the parasites in your life. You fueled their narratives, you validated their lies, and you metabolized their shame. But as an integrated observer, you withdraw that fuel with a cold and final hand. Consider the mechanics of the family system or the toxic workplace. These environments depend on a processor, someone who takes the unprocessed shadow material and neutralizes it. If a leader is a narcissist, the empath translates his rage into passion for the sake of the team. But when you stop translating and stop cleaning, the rot becomes visible to everyone in the room. The parasitic sibling can no longer hide behind your understanding. The toxic parent can no longer avoid their own darkness by using you as their emotional waste bin. The manipulative partner can no longer control you through guilt trips because you have stopped feeling responsible. The servant who enabled the madness is dead, and in their place stands a sovereign who values peace. You now value your own internal tranquility more than you value avoiding a social confrontation. This withdrawal of energy is not an act of war, it is an act of absolute clarity. However, the system ill perceive it as war because you are disrupting their comfort. Machiavelli warned that there is nothing more difficult than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order. Some of your relationships will deepen into something legendary and authentic. The people who respect your transformation will step up to meet your new frequency. These connections will become more powerful than anything you have ever experienced. But other relationships will disintegrate, and they will disintegrate loudly and violently. The people who profited from your lack of boundaries will rage against your awakening. They will recruit allies and construct narratives where you are the problem. They will call you cold or arrogant, because if they make you the villain, they don't have to face themselves. This is where your real power is tested. You do not defend yourself against their lies or explain your new boundaries. You do not try to convince them of your value or your sanity. You observe, and you watch them reveal their true character through their frantic reactions. You make your decisions based on that raw data without anger or bitterness. This is conscious participation, engaging with the world as it actually exists. You see people clearly, you accept them as they are, and you choose your circle based on that clarity. In the sixth stage of Machiavellian integration, the sovereign becomes aggressively selective. Machiavelli noted that familiarity breeds contempt, and for you, this is the ultimate strategic lesson. In your fragmented state, you were an open door, believing that being accessible was a virtue. You thought that by being constantly available, you were proving your worth to the world. But in the architecture of power, an open door is simply an invitation for exploitation. Selective inaccessibility is not about building walls of fear, it is about building a threshold of value. You begin to apply your predictive intelligence to determine who is worthy of your inner circle. You are still capable of profound presence and holding space for genuine pain. But now, these capacities are reserved for individuals who demonstrate reciprocal integrity. You no longer offer your premium emotional labor for free to those who only wish to consume. For everyone else, you become a ghost, not hostile, not reactive, simply unavailable. You do not explain why you are not responding or offer apologies for your absence. You simply operate from a level where their noise cannot reach you. This is where you trade the nice of the servant for the civil of the sovereign. Civility is a code of conduct, the polite distance maintained between two powers. This selectivity is not based on emotional judgment, it is based on pattern recognition. You have observed certain personality structures operate and you know their trajectory. You don't need months to determine if someone is operating from integrity. You know, within minutes. You trust the data. If the data says parasite, the sovereign closes the gate. Your time is a treasury, and you are the only one with the key. By making yourself scarce, you make your presence a rare and valuable asset. The world treats common things with neglect, but it treats rare things with awe. Become rare, become inaccessible, become sovereign. The final stage of this evolution is the emergence of the individuated prince. This is not merely a change in behavior, it is a total structural collapse of your old identity. This is the version of you that has descended into the deepest, most silent parts of your own darkness. You have traveled to the center of your shadow and returned with capabilities that the masses can only dream of. You have mastered the dragons you found there and transformed their fire into the fuel for your own throne. Understand the psychological magnitude of this moment. You are no longer afraid of loss. You are no longer afraid of loss because you have already lost the version of yourself that was a slave. You have already experienced the death of the servant, and you found that you survived it. When a man survives the death of his ego, he becomes operationally untouchable to the threats of lesser men. You are now a whole man, owning every square inch of your psychological territory. You possess the compassion to see the deep pain of the world, but you possess the steel for immediate severance. You hold the gentleness of a father and the clinical coldness of a general in the same hand. You are no longer limited to one mode of being. You are a multi-dimensional force of nature. The unhealed servant asks why the world is so cruel. The sovereign knows the world was the anvil for his power. You were never meant to save everyone. You were never meant to be the world's emotional pack mule. You were meant to save yourself, and in doing so, you became a landmark for the lost. You are now a lighthouse, not a rescue boat that sinks under the weight of those it tries to save. By standing firm on your own rock, you provide more help than you ever did by drowning alongside the masses. You are operationally untouchable to those who mistake your awareness for availability. You don't argue with the unconscious, you don't defend your reality, and you don't prove anything to the blind. Machiavelli knew that the common people are always taken by appearances and by the results of an event. Therefore, let them judge your results. Do not waste your breath explaining your methods. You simply see the truth, you assess the risk, and you act with the weight of an entire kingdom behind you. Usually, you act by walking away so quietly that the room doesn't realize the light has left until it is dark. There is a specific power in the silent exit, a lack of drama that signals absolute self-possession. This is the state of the sovereign. Immune to manipulation and immovable in the face of guilt trips. Protecting your peace is not a selfish act. It is the only sane response to a world that will eat you alive if you remain porous. Walking away from rot is not a sign of weakness. It is the ultimate expression of self-respect. Choosing your kingdom over their self-inflicted chaos is the foundation of every future victory you will claim. Your breaking point was not a disaster, it was your initiation into the elite ranks of the conscious. Your empathy is no longer a wound that leaks power, it is now your ultimate strategic advantage. You see the strings on the puppets, you see the gears in the machine, and you refuse to be moved by either. Now that you wield your perception consciously, you are unreachable by anything that is not true. This is the sovereign prince, integrated, formidable, and finally, absolutely free. The time for theory is dead. The time for preparation has passed. The time for execution is the only thing that remains. You have the blueprint of human behavior in your mind, and the steel of Machiavelli in your spine. Go forth and rule the only territory that matters, the kingdom of your own soul. When you rule yourself with iron, the world has no choice but to follow your lead. Do not look back at the servants you left behind. They are committed to their own chains. Look forward to the empire that is rising from the ashes of your old self. You are the architect. You are the builder. You are the king. This transmission is complete, but your reign has just begun. Maintain the silence, protect the scarcity, and trust the data. You are untouchable. 3, 2, 1. Execute.